I'm a certified addiction treatment counselor, tier 2, certified clinical supervisor.
And he is going to talk to us about
Talking about addiction, and I hate the word, but that's what I'm talking about. It's so simple and so generic. But anyway, my name is Billy, and I am a drug addict, and I am an alcoholic. All right! Yeah, I didn't give it away. I spent 23 years in daily use, and I used just about everything except for heroin itself. I did do opiates, didn't like them that much. 2 months, God willing, I'll have 19 years clean and sober, so I'm almost equal on the other side. I started studying addiction literally almost 18 and a half years ago, and I've been in this field for somewhere around 16 and a half years. And what I'm going to talk to you today about is what is addiction. Because everybody likes to think it's a choice. Everybody likes to tell us just man up. People like to, you know, I hear all this stuff. Addiction. You know, it's not pot, it's not heroin. It could be spending. It could be sex, it could be gambling. It could be codependency. It can be any dissociative, obsessive, compulsive disorder that takes you out of the internal emotional structure that you are suffering from. So, in 1935, a book was written that came out of a wonderful organization called Alcoholics Anonymous. I love the book, but also to let you know, people like Dr. Daniel Siegel and others, neurobiologists, have held this book up and said it's probably the best book ever written. Not because it gives you a bunch of drunkalog, because it probably depicts, in the best, my psychological state. I don't think like you. And that's very clear. So one of the things the book first outlined is a certain population has the inability to not drink. The inability to say no. Science we have a neurobiology of addiction today. In other words, science knows there is a fact and reason, which I hopefully I'll get to in an hour. We'll talk real fast. For certain individuals, such as myself, have a true medical inability to say no. However, shame gets built upon me because I have grown up listening to everybody tell me, why don't you just make a better choice? Why don't you? You know, it really blows my mind when I deal with people, because do you really think a human being, and you're abnormal psych, do you really think a human being can make a bad choice consistently throughout their life until they end up in San Quentin? Can a human being literally make the same bad choice over and over throughout their life until they lose custody of their kids? I can go on and on and on. That makes no psychological sense. Your mammal's wired to survive, and the addict is not doing that. So later on in the book it says alcohol was but a symptom. We had to get down to causes and conditions. Okay? Science, neurobiology of attachment, bonding, abandonment, affect regulation. Simply put, the human's ability to regulate their own human emotional state. So, if you look at all this, what we have today is we have a very clear story from a child being born till them sitting in my office across from me. But I got to get that story. One of Dr. Shor's lecture, he says very specifically, if we know something about the subconscious motivations of any individual, it is a much better predictor of how they're going to do in certain situations. Here's the phone. I'm so used to that in group. So what is that? That is the psychological state, the emotional state of a human being and their coping skills facing life situations usually stressful. So real quick, we'll go over what is susceptibility. These are the key factors that may take place. Not everybody comes in, not everybody becomes one of us. However, again, as I include all the other ones, you get a good codependent who comes out of a dysfunctional family and never takes a drink, but they marry us. Nothing dysfunctional about that stuff there, is there? So the first is a predisposition. A genetic link. And real quick, Dr. Drew had a special on quite some time ago. He had a nice long dinner table. He was talking to young adults, probably ranging, if I remember correctly, somewhere between 19 and 25. This dinner was a very casual discussion of what is addiction. Is it a choice? Is it something that is not a choice? And as they went through, there was a young woman who was very agitated and looked very, very scared. And he finally asked her. This young woman had never had a drink in her life. I think she was 23 years of age. Very weird to me. She had lost her mother to alcoholism through liver failure. I don't know if anybody here knows what that would look like in a medical condition. It's one of the most horrific deaths you can experience, maybe even worse than AIDS. And her father was currently on his deathbed due to alcoholism. She was terrified of pain. Dr. Drew asked her, would you like to take a genetic test to see if you are predisposed to the illness? And she was very afraid of this, and the meeting and the dinner went on. At the end of this, before the show ended, he asked her again, and she said yes. Well, he took the young lady to the UCLA Medical Center. I emphasize UCLA because this wasn't some corner little clinic. And they swabbed her. And they ran a test. And the test came back that this girl was positive strongly for the A1, the A2 gene. There are other genes out there. I can't remember them because they're all things like the C2YG. You know. But these are very common. These are strongly linked and held to be the alcoholic genes. Ironically enough, they have a propensity for methamphetamine, heroin, and pot. And I love that because heroin addicts want to tell me they're not alcoholics. But if you were to swab them, you would probably find that maybe there were other genetic markers, but they're probably going to come up moderately strong with the A1, A2 gene. This can be passed on to generations like any genetically predisposed condition. It can skip generations, and there's no determining factor out of 5 kids who may or may not get it. If it is on both sides of the family, whatever the gene structure, it will increase this piece of susceptibility by 40 to 50%. Quickly, if you want to rule out in your family, you have to know 3 full generations on both sides. And that's cousins, aunts, that's all of them. If you don't know them, you can't say that there is no addiction or depression or cutting or anything else. If you can't rule any of these maladaptive behaviors out of 3 full generations on both sides, you just don't know. And I would suggest then we kind of err on caution. Second one. Family, social, in other words, environment. Again, we know today that the environment plays an incredible piece on brain development. And when I say development, I mean actually cell growth, neural net connections, all the way down to transcription and expression. So brains are developing specifically to the environment in which they grew up. The human being is a mammal. They forget that. They have to survive the system. The system will teach them how to survive, and we are going to learn. And that's all going to be lower limbic emotional and lower limbic survival. And I did forget this in the last class. I want you all to remember something when I go through this. 75% of everything the human being does is first pre-calculated in the limbic system. And then travels up the right hemisphere, which is all emotional, through the basal forebrain, and then across. What you don't realize is you're calculating all of life and decision on an emotional brain and the external safety factor, and you don't even know it. So the last piece is adding a substance and or a behavior. There are a lot of behaviors that we have that are what we call dissociative. In other words, the human being dissociates from their internal structure on an outside figure, basically almost out of body. It's a great way to completely shut down and distance yourself from the emotions you are currently feeling. Gaming addiction is one, and it is now currently in the DSM-5. Not by playing games, but when you play games for 16 hours straight. I like to go to Dr. Phil, I go there a lot, and one of the guys he had was gaming from 19 hours a day plus. He was number 3 or the 3rd out of the top 5 in the country in some of the online games. He had lost 50 pounds, he was 25 years old, and he had no capability at all dealing with any kind of reality. His identity, everything about him was an avatar. But when you gave him real life, he freaked out. Very similar to what happens when you take away alcohol or drugs from meat. So you have your brain, basically, you probably know this, 3 different parts, 2 different halves. Very interesting because when a child is born, it has a very, very, very bare neural net or tree. It has a basic neurochemical structure and that's it. Very important because the next 2 years the brain's going to expand its size by 2, maybe 3 times its size. It's going to grow 10,000 synaptic connections per minute for 2 full years. All of this exploding to the environment. And the brain and the neural net is growing to help and decide how the child can get its needs met, how it can achieve security and safety, and ultimately attach to the primary caregiver, which is a secure attachment figure. And you will all attach, all human beings will, it's just how. This is nature, folks. This isn't anything cognitive. We forget we're mammals. We forget in our narcissism how we operate or do what we do. So, what's the cortex? Language, vision, auditory. It's cognition. Left is linear. You got to be past your future. You're great at blueprints and recipes, and you're great at all the gizmos and the computers and all that other stuff. And the right hemisphere is all emotional. And these two are supposed to talk to each other, and the top's supposed to talk to the bottom. We call that integration. Normal brains work in all areas. Brains that don't, or like a kidney or anything else, they're in a diseased state. Underneath that, you have the limbic system. Now we're getting into some of the oldest part of the brain. Everything has a limbic system. My dog has a limbic system. The little bird has a limbic system. Everybody has, everything that's mammal has a limbic system. It's what drives you. It's your survival. It's your emotions. It's been with us since we were, I don't know, eating sticks on each other. The evolution of the brain is that upper cortical that came on board and developed so that we would have regulation of this part of the brain. Intellect predominating emotion. regulation of emotional states, regulation of the expression of emotional states. Now, anybody in here ever experienced anxiety? Yeah, I know this shit, didn't Amygdala. And so the amygdala is a very important piece about what I'm about to talk about. The amygdala is part of your fight and flight. And last is your brainstem. It's basically somatic. It has a lot of responsibility. It's your body's temperature, your heart rate, your respiration, all that wonderful stuff that is never ever calculated or whatever. The brainstem, being the oldest reptilian part of the brain, has an important part because it also has a connection up here to the amygdala and the limbic regarding the fight and flight system, which if activated is going to highly stimulate your sympathetic nervous system, lower your GABA or your parasympathetic nervous system, throw blood to certain parts of your body, take away from certain parts of your body, and put you in a hypervigilant state, one of survival. What a concept. Right behind your eyeballs, you have what we call the orbital frontal cortex, medial frontal cortex, all this stuff. It's called that because it's right behind the eye socket. This is your executive branch. This is the regulatory system of impulse control. This is what maps and thinks. Choice is made up here. All the important things. Focus attention. Prioritize. All this stuff that makes us a little human. Also from here it has GABA fibers that run down again to the amygdala and enable the fight and flight system. And the GABA, which is part of your, or the major parasympathetic slow down system, enables us to calm ourselves, to feel emotions and not to be emotionally flooded. Well, that means the people I work with, you take drugs and alcohol away from them, keeping you out of the shopping mall, whatever it is, they're going to become emotionally over-flooded, creating a very hot limbic system, creating a lot of anxiety, fear, and other things, stating to themselves or to the bottom brain, this is dangerous and I need to shut it down. Here's your link in early child development. The deep limbic system is bonding, attachment. It equates to safety, security, needs being met. When these things are being met, you have a stable, calm brain. You have a developing brain that gets a sense of trust. You have a developing brain that gets a sense of security, all that other stuff. And or you get a brain that just don't trust anything. Anything. Little children run around and we gawk and we go, oh, that's so cute, look at this pig in the living room. No shame, no embarrassment. And again, we just kind of pass that over and attribute it to these are just small children. No, there's no shame. That means they haven't been exposed to shame yet. They haven't been suppressed yet. We haven't boxed them in for them to learn what will be acceptable in this system and what will not be. So they're free. Once we start to teach them, they will learn. You may not be teaching them verbally. You may be. Children learn a lot more by what they see. What you don't realize is they're watching how men and women interact. What you don't understand is they're learning how people love one another. They're learning what the definition of love is by the atmosphere in the house. They're learning what security is by the nurturing being given to them. All these things are equating in a survival brain that is mostly dominant. The first 3 years of a child's life is all right hemisphere dominant. It is all emotionally dominant. For the rest of your life, you are going to calculate from your limbic system through the basal forebrain what is safety and security. You will read facial expression, you will read affect, depression, you will read tone of voice, everything about the environment, and you don't know it, is going to calculate and going to cross over to the left hemisphere, and some kind of decision or behavior is going to be formed. Emotional expression is the key to one of the most stable developing brains human beings can get. You're wired to express how you feel. That's why the child can tell you anything. If you grow up, however, and you keep hearing things like, I don't understand how you can feel that way. We've given you everything you could possibly want. How can you possibly be mad at it? I don't understand. If you express what is natural to you, fear, anxiety, anything else, and you continually get shut down. If you're now 8 years old and all you've heard for 8 years is, I don't understand how do you feel internally? Not all at once, please. How do you feel internally? Like shit. Absolutely. And am I not kind of looking at what's wrong with me if the secure attachment figures and everybody above me can't understand me? Where does the problem lie? Internally. We will develop into the don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. Which means the child's going to go into a complete suppression of emotional states. Not ever expressing their anxiety over school, social interaction, household, anything else. They're not going to believe they have anybody that will validate, care for them, or accept it. So I'm going to spend the rest of my life holding it inside, showing you a false figure. So I got father over here, because somewhere in all dysfunction, you're going to find a male dysfunctional figure. Sorry, guys, it's the way it is. Screwed up females came out of abuse from screwed up males. That's just the way it is. Do history. Look at the world today. Come on. So I got an 8-year-old boy. And like I tell every group, this guy's out playing on a Saturday out in the street. Yeah, you guys don't get it. See, you don't get it. We used to have e-ticket rides at Disneyland. But anyway, we used to play football, light post to light post. We were in the street, drinking from the hose. You guys are all frickin' texting. But anyway, I got an 8-year-old boy who's outside playing with all the other neighbor kids. Now, probably from a maladaptive childhood and internal structure, I got a neighbor kid who's the bully and decides he's going to pick on little Timmy. This is this kid's poor way of gaining some sort of self-esteem or whatever it is, because in his house he's probably picked on and told to be a man or whatever the hell it is. So Johnny starts picking on little Timmy. Now at 8 years old, and maybe for the rest of your life, that's going to activate the fight and flight system in an 8-year-old boy. You bet your ass it is. We're going to have a complete activation now of adrenaline, glutamate system, the sympathetic. We're going to get into that entire fight and flight, and the child decides flight. He breaks out in tears as he's running home to his father on a Saturday. Who owed? Oh. Well, then don't get in this field. He busts into the house, he goes running up to Dad, and he's crying, and Dad drops everything. It's Saturday, and he says, Timmy, what's wrong? And Timmy says, Johnny's trying to beat me up, he's chasing me around, he wants to hurt me. Okay, I'm going to give you 2 scenarios. First, I'm going to give you the right one. So, Timmy had an emotional expression, and that was of fear. He went to the secure attachment figure, representing safety. And Dad validated that emotion. This is the first step to where a human being, male or female, is learning that in communicating how I feel is okay. Normal. Then Dad would provide through that security by maybe saying, okay, Timmy, we'll deal with it later, but why don't you just hang out with me today around the house? I could use some help and you'll just kind of kick it. Bonding, a sense of security. From that, and this is all limbic, guys, this is all limbic. From that comes the ultimate, which is safety, which is exactly what this is supposed to provide. All homes, every time we're in the home should be getting this. Ultimately, trust. I have a complete cycle, and I am learning that I can express my human condition, that it will be heard, that it will not be dismissed, that I will be provided for my needs, they will be met, and I will feel okay, and I will feel complete. I grow up like this, I will be able to communicate to other human beings, especially to women. I'll be able to be vulnerable. I'll be able to tell my spouse how I feel. Men don't get this shit, so you hurt a man in a relationship, he doesn't know anything of what to do, so he says, you goddamn bitch. Not a real therapeutic thing for the relationship, but that's what he does because anger has become his acceptable expression of everything. So what typically happens is Dad tells Timmy, you need to get up and you need to go outside and you need to face it off with Johnny right now. Uh-oh. No validation at all. Certainly, we have no emotional regulation here. The child's going off the thing. He's got to attach with Dad, right? He's got to do what Dad's telling him to do. There was no security provided because he's got to go out and face what to him is a physical threat. So we obviously have no safety provided, and I'm not going to trust. Now science is real clear, as I told you guys before, we got to bond. You're going to bond. That's just the way it is. If you want to really do the research and find out all the different attachment disorders, it makes real good sense. He just learned in the system that to bond with his father, which is necessary, he'll never show fear again. See, the system's going to teach me how to behave. Literally going to teach me. If my dad rages at my mother, I'm going to grow up and believe that that's okay to do to women. Whatever is going on, the equation of love is what I'm seeing. If you want to really get into deep neural perception and everything else, that one word, love, is going to have a different experience for everybody in this room. Where society thinks it's supposed to be this flowery thing. Love to some people is abandonment, physical abuse, complete neglect, and all sorts of things. And then they get into relationships and they ruin those relationships because internally, you're going to leave me anyway and abandon me and all that other shit. Because this is going to go throughout my lifespan. This is going to be with me forever unless something happens and brings me to a goddamn crash and burn, where somebody starts telling me why I do what I do. That's a really screwed up part of it. So anyway, I can give you millions of examples. You're kind of getting it. One or two instances is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about family systems that children get the same message for 17, 18 years. So when this is taking place, whatever this is, the child's brain is being bathed in cortisol, stress hormones. And it is going to have an impact and a setting on that brain. It is going to have a specific alteration, especially with the hedonic system and other things. This child, as I've just shown you, cannot express these emotions. Cannot express any of it. Does not feel there's anybody that will listen. So I'm growing up holding them all inside, and I'm showing you this complete false front. And I can tell you, maybe you don't experience this, but I can tell you as the addict from coming from male abandonment and a father that left me in the 5th grade for another woman, what it's like to play the game. oh, it's probably better this way, we would have never got along anyway. What it was like for me to put on that male front when I went back to school in 5th grade and became one of them. What it was like for me to feel that my dad walked out on me. What it was like for him to want me to meet the new woman. Yeah. It was terrifying. I couldn't show it because that would be unmanlike. There was nobody that's going to listen. One day, somebody stole some beer. And they brought it over. And they wanted me to drink it with them. This is classified as peer pressure.
How old were you?
Oh, 14, 13. Oh, I also had family that was big in this too. My cousin's husband, who I loved dearly, came back from Vietnam when I was 13 and married my cousin, and he became a father figure to me for years, and I will not get into that lifestyle. But that's who introduced me into Harley Davidsons and dealing and all sorts of wonderful paths when I went down and, you know, all that other shit. So, but anyway, I felt the peer pressure, and I'll tell you why I felt the peer pressure. We'll go back to my dad leaving. That's when the wall goes up. We call it rupture, repair, rupture, repair. All children will have rupture, and hopefully all children get repaired. This is part of the learning system of validation, security. I cry, I cry, I cry. Oh, somebody showed up. Somebody nurtured me. Somebody gave me a bottle. Somebody changed my diaper. Somebody hugged me, read me a story, whatever it is. I felt the peer pressure because though I have a mother who was totally in support of me, who loves me dearly, wasn't critical, didn't rage at me, didn't call me names, the rupture my father created, the wall that went up, will never ever accept true, authentic care, love again. Because deep down in my soul, I am not worthy. And I do not believe what you bring to me is authentic. I believe basically you're placating me. So the true love isn't getting in anymore. And I come to peer pressure and I fall to peer pressure because the rejection of you calling me a pussy and names and the outcast ain't ringing that bell with my father ever again. I'm going for it. Yeah, you bet. Pop me one of those cans. Give me that cigarette. Malignancy here. Immediate relief. I felt wonderful. It was gone, folks. It was totally gone. I have self-confidence. Everything I had been suffering emotionally from was gone. Chicks dig it. Let's rock this joint. It was all there. It was there. Now being, if you want to get back into neurochemistry and the rest, being the first time the amygdala had been put to sleep, the hedonic level had been hit, the amygdala creates an emotional memory. It's going to be the strongest of things that there is because safety just came to me in a way I never could have imagined. Complete safety. Now, also when you look at rejection and socialization and everything, this beer began something else. Social interaction. Here's a kid that's afraid of rejection. Here's a kid that's afraid to go to school. Here's all that other stuff. And all of a sudden, overnight, I got me a peer group. I found me a way to feel good, have a good time in life. I love it. I'm the bad guy. You call me the Lodi school. I got all these friends, Led Zeppelin, sex, drugs, rock and roll. We're on it. This is all I've ever looked for my whole life. This is the key. Sadly enough, I'm not an addict. No way, and at this point, not at all. Well, you're going to try to interrupt everything I just explained to you? You're going to try to take that away from me? Here comes the conflict with my parent. Here comes the conflict with everybody else. This is it, folks. You ain't stopping this train. And the sad part is every time peer pressure came about, you gotta understand, in my day, marijuana was prison, and it had shitty stems and seeds, and it was prison. I remember sitting in a housing tract in back of Richard's Le Mans, and they lit a joint. We're just sitting there in broad daylight, in the middle of a cul-de-sac, everybody can see us, and we're drinking, and I see that joint, and internally I go, holy shit! You know, somebody can see it and call the cops. He says, you want to hit? I hit that joint like I've been smoking for 40 years. Because you're not going to reject me. And again, what was the malignancy? Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I'll make sure you don't miss me back here again. So the malignancy was I just kept liking everything you brought me. What the brain isn't realizing, or what I don't realize as this is going on, is my mom may be in conflict with me. Maybe my grades are going down or whatever, and I'm all heated and pissed off, and I called her and I said, John, man, can you come pick me up and get me out of the house? Mom's a bitch. John comes over and picks me up and get in the car. He goes, dude, I got some weed. You want to get out? Well, hell yeah. Wow, all that tension and all that conflict with mom goes away. I'm not yet cognitively focusing on that, but the brain's learning how do you deal with stress in life. You get high. Form of dissociation. Now, as this progresses, it has its consequences, not just with the law and other things. This part of my brain is being hijacked. The motivational hierarchy of survival is being rewired. Care for self is being high. Focus is getting and staying. Priority is, these are all orbital frontal cortex things that aren't really working anymore. So if you look at the end of a nerve cell, an axon, we'll talk about dopamine. Dopamine's a reinforcer. It's a mapping chemical. I probably picked up too much in the board. It will map everything. Sight, smell, taste, what else is left, right? Sound, touch. Believe it or not, it's mapping everything that's connected with the reward. The reward for me is being high. Dopamine isn't going to map handcuffs. It doesn't do that shit. Dopamine isn't going to map being served with divorce papers. Doesn't do that. Dopamine isn't going to be mapped when I lose custody of my child, end up homeless, or any other thing. So what's the first thing an addict thinks about, regardless of his condition, when he thinks about getting high? No, it's euphoric recall. Since dopamine is only linked to reward when I'm getting out of jail, and the jail's right behind me for DUI, I'm on the phone to my dealer or finding an open liquor store so I can get drunk, even though I just spent 15 hours in the loop in Santa Ana, Maine. There's a jail that ain't 40 feet away. And my head's telling me to go use. There's no association with that entire experience to what I'm about to go connect with. I'll tell you, the cops should have been busting the bank robbers. It sucks that they park over there by REI. I'm going to give you all the excuses. I deserve to get high because I was in jail for 15 hours and I got to go to court. I deserve to get high because she's leaving me, the bitch. I deserve to get high because they fired me when it's none of their business what I do on my own time. Blah, 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 blah. So when you look at dopamine, you look at the lower limbic system, look at what we call the ventral tegmental area, the VTA, assuming you guys have basic anatomy structure of that. That is the reward system. You all know reward. You know what it's like when you have finished your best favoriteest meal. That's dopamine. You know what it's like when you walk in the house on Thanksgiving and you smell the turkey, you feel the warmth of the heater because it's cold outside, you hear the football game in the other room, and all this begins to tell you you need to go crack the beer, sit down, bond. I can go on and on and on. Now, all this is just stimulated by environment because you have mapped these situations unknowingly through the reward delivered by dopamine. So what happened with the first beer? Well, you know how this all works. We have an electrical impulse that comes down and strikes the cell, which motivates these little like pods or whatever, stacks or whatever to the end of the cell. And they kind of pop and they release all the neurochemical, in this case dopamine, that will cross the synaptic gap and they will bond into receptor sites that they fit in, causing another electrical impulse. And we have a full connection. We have a turn on like lights. Now, you have chemicals like MAO, which is very important, that are going to interact and cause these neurotransmitters to leave the receptor site. They will travel up the side of the receptor site, and they will be taken to the reuptake pump and recycled, and then that electrical chemical reaction would stop, the other cell would shut off. Pain centers do the opposite. They're already firing, and the opiate bonds or the endorphins will bond and will shut off that electrical signal, meaning you will not be able to feel the pain. By the way, why do we have an opiate epidemic in this country today? You have pain centers around your intestines. If you did an autopsy, it's so big they call it the second brain. It's wonderful to look at. You have nerve centers around your heart. Where do you feel the emotions that you have gone through in life? Do you feel them in your head? That's right. Have a heartache? Feel nauseous? Anxieties in the stomach? What do you think opiates do to those nerve centers? Yeah. The ultimate emotional shutdown. And when you look at 16, maybe 15 to 25-year-olds in the epidemic with the opiate, they're not partying the way I did. They're shutting down. We have a huge population of disenfranchised youth who's found the best way to shut down emotional pain that anybody's ever known of. It's not uncommon for me to have a 25-year-old to casually sit in group and say, yeah, dude, man, I've flatlined 4 times, man. That's how they say it. Flatlined 4 times. So what happened when I had the first beer? Well, I had an over-release of dopamine throughout the system, coming from the ventral tegmental area up to the nucleus accumbens. So even though the receptor sites were normally emptying, they were being filled immediately, which gave me an overstimulation, okay? Which logged the emotional memory, which caused me relief. Relieving this pain can be done many ways. I chose drugs. Now, obviously, if I'm going to do this on a regular basis, as I ended up doing quite rapidly, I changed friends 3 times by the time I got out of high school. I was really on it. If you didn't want to drink the next day, I had to find somebody that did. If you didn't want to drink away the hangover, I had to find somebody that did. If you didn't like the way I used drugs, get the hell out of the house, hold the door, hit you on the ass. How many relationships, don't you think you drink too much? See, yeah, wouldn't want to be ya. I'm doing this right out in the open. I ain't hiding this shit. Ain't no drug under the kitchen sink shit. I was wide open. Let's go. So as time goes on and I'm doing this, you got to realize the drug ain't getting you high, folks. It doesn't do that. What's getting you high is the drug.